Iwo Jima was a small volcanic island in the Pacific, but in 1945 it became one of the most heavily defended places on Earth. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi knew he was going to die there. He understood that long before the first American Marine ever landed. Unlike many of his fellow commanders, he rejected the idea of mass suicide charges. He believed they only wasted lives without changing the outcome. Instead, he gave his soldiers a different order. Make every step cost the enemy something. So the island was transformed. More than 11 miles of tunnels were dug beneath the volcanic rock. Hidden bunkers were carved into cliffs. Gun positions were built underground, invisible from the surface. When American forces arrived, they expected the island to fall in a few days. Instead, they were pulled into one of the longest and most brutal battles in the Pacific War. It lasted over a month. By March 1945, resistance on Iwo Jima was collapsing. Kuribayashi removed his rank insignia and his medals. Then he led his remaining men into the darkness for one final attack. He was never seen again. After the battle, American forces searched the island. They found no body, no confirmed grave, no clear ending, just silence. And letters. Letters he had written to his wife and children. They were not propaganda, not speeches of honor. They were personal, quiet, human. A man who missed his family and knew he would never return to them. But if Kuribayashi represents a commander who understood defeat was inevitable, the next man represents how the war even began. And the United States was so determined to kill him that they built a mission around one intercepted message. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan struck the American Pacific Fleet. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and the United States entered World War II. For America, Yamamoto became the man responsible for it all. Then, in 1943, American intelligence made a discovery. They intercepted a Japanese communication detailing Yamamoto's exact travel route. Not a guess, a schedule. The United States decided to act immediately. The mission was called Operation Vengeance. 18 P-38 fighter planes flew hundreds of miles over open ocean. They stayed just above the waves to avoid radar detection. One mistake meant crashing into the sea with no chance of rescue. But they reached their target. Over Bougainville, they intercepted Yamamoto's aircraft. Within minutes, his plane was shot down. When Japanese recovery teams reached the crash site, they found something unsettling. Yamamoto was still seated in his cockpit. His white-gloved hand still held his sword. It looked as if he had never left command, even in death. The man who helped ignite the Pacific War ended in a jungle far from home. But his death was not the most disturbing end of the war. 2 years later, another commander chose a death that belonged to a completely different era. Okinawa, the final major battle before a possible invasion of mainland Japan. The fighting was catastrophic. More than 100,000 Japanese soldiers died. Tens of thousands of American soldiers were killed, and an unknown number of civilians were caught in between. General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese defense. By June 1945, the outcome was no longer in question. His army had been pushed into a corner of the island. There was no escape, no reinforcements, no future. On a quiet night overlooking the ocean, Ushijima prepared for his final act. He committed seppuku, a ritual suicide rooted in samurai tradition. He sat on a white cloth, used a ceremonial blade, and ended his life according to an ancient code. While modern warfare destroyed the island above him, his death followed rules from centuries past. Before he died, he left behind a final poem. It described falling cherry blossoms, a symbol of beauty and impermanence. But the next man did not leave behind poetry. He left behind questions that still disturb historians today. Shiro Ishii was a doctor, and the head of Unit 731. Officially, it was a research unit. In reality, it was a place where prisoners were used in biological and medical experiments. Diseases were tested on human beings, Freezing experiments were conducted to study gangrene. Operations were performed without anesthesia. Thousands died. Possibly many more. As the war ended, evidence was systematically destroyed. Records were burned. Facilities were dismantled, and witnesses disappeared. So after the war, many expected prosecution. They expected trials. They expected punishment. That did not happen. Instead, Ishii struck a deal. American authorities wanted biological warfare data. He had it. In exchange for full access to his research, he received immunity. No prison, no trial, no execution. He lived freely until 1959. Sometimes history does not deliver justice. But if Ishii's story feels unbearable, the next case is even harder to explain, because it involves two men from the same chain of command and two completely different endings. In December 1937, Japanese forces captured the Chinese city of Nanking. What followed became one of the worst atrocities of the Second World War era. Mass killings, widespread violence against civilians, entire districts destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people died. General Iwan Matsui was the commanding officer. After the war, he was arrested and put on trial. He claimed he did not fully understand what was happening on the ground. The court rejected his defense. As commander, they said, responsibility still applied. He was sentenced to death. He was hanged. But another senior figure connected to the operation was never prosecuted. Prince Yasuhiko Asaka, a member of Japan's imperial family. Evidence later suggested he may have played an operational role during the occupation. But he was never put on trial. The United States chose not to prosecute members of the imperial household. The goal was stability during the occupation of Japan. So one man was executed. The other lived for decades in comfort. Same operation, same system, different consequences. That is not justice. It is politics. But the next commander faced a different kind of judgment, not for what he personally ordered, but for what his soldiers did while under his command. They called him the Tiger of Malaya, General Tomoyuki Yamashita. In 1942, he achieved a rapid victory that shocked the Allied forces. Singapore fell in just 7 days. But by 1945, his situation was completely different. He was trapped in the Philippines. His forces were scattered and disorganized. And during that collapse, atrocities were committed by units under his command. After the war, Yamashita was arrested. His defense argued he had no control over many of his troops. Communication had broken down completely. The court rejected the argument. They ruled that a commander is responsible for his forces, even without direct control. He was sentenced to death, hanged in 1946. The legal principle from his trial is still discussed in international law today. But the final man was different. Because he was not just a commander, he was the face of the entire war. Hideki Tojo, Prime Minister of Japan. When Japan surrendered, American forces came to arrest him. Tojo attempted suicide. He shot himself in the chest. But he survived. American doctors saved his life so he could stand trial. At the Tokyo trials, Tojo defended Japan's actions during the war. He accepted political responsibility, but showed no public remorse. He remained loyal to the emperor until the end. On December 23, 1948, he was executed by hanging. One final failure. Even his own death did not go according to plan. And that is what connects all of these men. Different ranks, different roles, different endings. Some died as warriors, some as criminals. Some escaped justice entirely, and some never even left a trace behind.